3 years. That is how long I thought Marcus and I were building something real together. I was 28, working as a freelance graphic designer, pouring my heart into every project while believing we were creating our future side by side. The way he used to look at me when I showed him my latest designs, the pride in his voice when he called me his talented artist. But that night, as I stood in our kitchen wearing the dress I had bought just to make him smile, Marcus looked me straight in the eye and said those words that would change everything. Before I tell you how I turned his cruelest judgment into my greatest triumph, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like button if you have ever felt underestimated by someone who claimed to love you. Subscribe, because what happened next will show you exactly how to prove the doubters wrong and build the future they said you could never have. When Marcus and I first met on that dating app 2 years before that devastating night, I was already passionate about my work as a freelance graphic designer. Sure, my income was not always predictable, but I loved what I did, and I was good at it. Marcus worked as a sales manager at a real estate company, pulling in a steady six-figure salary that made him feel secure about his place in the world. In those early days, he seemed genuinely impressed by my creativity and artistic vision. Those first 6 months together felt like a fairy tale. Marcus would brag to his friends about dating a real artist, someone with actual talent who could create beautiful things from nothing. He would sit beside me while I worked late into the night, bringing me coffee and watching me transform blank canvases into compelling brand identities. When I landed a particularly exciting project, he would take me out to celebrate, telling me how proud he was to be with someone so gifted. He even suggested I should think about opening my own studio someday, saying he would support whatever I wanted to do. We started making plans together. Marcus wanted us to move into a high-end apartment downtown, and he seemed perfectly happy to cover most of the rent since his income was more reliable. We talked about getting a dog, maybe traveling to Europe the following summer. I felt like I had found someone who truly understood and valued what I brought to the table, even if it was not traditional financial stability. But then Marcus got promoted to senior sales manager, and everything began to shift. His new position put him in contact with a different crowd of colleagues, people who drove expensive cars and vacationed in the Hamptons. Suddenly, he was spending more time with couples, where both partners earned substantial salaries, and I started noticing subtle changes in how he talked about our relationship. At first, it was small comments that he tried to pass off as jokes. He would mention how his colleague Sarah had just bought herself a brand new BMW, casually adding that she was a corporate lawyer. Or he would talk about how his boss and his wife had just purchased a second home, emphasizing how they were both high earners who could afford such luxuries. These observations always seemed to circle back to questions about my own financial goals. Marcus started expressing concern about our financial dynamic. He began keeping track of who paid for what, something he had never done before. When we went out to dinner, he would pause before reaching for the check-making comments about how he always seemed to be covering the bill. He suggested maybe I should think about taking on more clients, or perhaps consider getting a part-time job to supplement my design income. I tried to accommodate his concerns. I started working longer hours, taking on projects I would normally decline because they were not creatively fulfilling but paid well. I began turning down invitations to social events because I needed to focus on building my client base. When Marcus suggested we should probably look for a less expensive apartment since he was essentially supporting both of us, I agreed, even though it stung. The criticism became more direct over time. Marcus stopped attending my art shows and exhibitions, claiming he was too busy with work to waste time on things that did not have practical value. When I excitedly showed him a piece that had been featured in a local design magazine, he barely looked up from his phone. He started referring to my career as a hobby rather than a profession, suggesting I needed to find a real job if I wanted to be taken seriously as an adult. Our conversations became increasingly tense. Marcus would compare me unfavorably to his colleagues' girlfriends and wives, women who had traditional careers in law, medicine, or finance. He made it clear that he was embarrassed by having to explain my unconventional work situation to his new social circle. The man who once bragged about dating an artist now seemed ashamed of my chosen profession. I found myself walking on eggshells around him, trying to prove my worth through increased productivity and income. But no matter how hard I worked or how much my client base grew, it was never enough to meet his shifting standards. The foundation of respect and admiration that our relationship had been built on was crumbling, and I could feel Marcus pulling away from me emotionally. The final warning sign came when I overheard him on a phone call with one of his friends. He was in the bedroom with the door closed, but our apartment walls were thin. I heard him say he was not sure if he should continue our relationship because he needed someone who could match his ambition and financial stability. Those words hit me like a physical blow, but I told myself maybe I was misunderstanding the context. That was when I decided to make one last effort to save what we had built together. I planned a special evening cooking his favorite meal and setting the table with candles and flowers. I put on the dress he had complimented me on during our first date, hoping to remind him of why he had fallen for me in the first place. I was ready to have an honest conversation about our future, maybe even bring up the possibility of engagement. The night I had planned to be our fresh start turned into the most devastating evening of my adult life. I spent the entire afternoon preparing Marcus's favorite dinner beef bourguignon with roasted vegetables, the same meal I had cooked for his birthday the year before. I arranged fresh flowers on the table, lit candles throughout the apartment, and put on soft jazz music to create the perfect romantic atmosphere. I wore that black dress he had once said made me look like a movie star, and I felt confident that this evening would remind him of everything good between us. Marcus arrived home nearly an hour later than usual, and I could immediately tell something was off. He walked through the door with barely a glance at the beautiful table I had set or acknowledgement of the effort I had clearly put into the evening. He loosened his tie and grabbed a beer from the refrigerator without even commenting on the delicious smells filling our apartment. During dinner, I tried to engage him in conversation about his day, about a new project I was excited about anything that might spark the connection we used to have. But Marcus ate mechanically, checking his phone between bites and responding to my attempts at conversation with single-word answers. It was like sitting across from a stranger who was simply tolerating my presence. When I finally gathered the courage to bring up our future together, suggesting we should start thinking more seriously about where our relationship was heading, Marcus set down his fork and gave me a look I had never seen before. It was cold, almost clinical, as if he was preparing to deliver bad news to a client, rather than talk to someone he supposedly loved. He told me he had been doing a lot of thinking about us, about where we were going, and whether it made sense to continue. He said I was a good person, someone he cared about, but he had reached the conclusion that we were not compatible in the ways that mattered for a long-term partnership. When I asked him to explain what he meant, his words became increasingly cruel. Marcus told me he needed someone who could match his lifestyle, someone who understood the importance of financial stability and professional success. He said he had realized he could not build a future with someone whose career was so unpredictable, someone he would have to support financially for the rest of their lives. He called my work unstable and unrealistic, suggesting I was living in a fantasy world if I thought graphic design could ever provide the kind of security he needed in a partner. The words that will be burned into my memory forever came next. He looked me directly in the eyes and said with complete conviction, "I cannot be with someone who has no future." He said it like he was stating an obvious fact, as if my lack of potential was something any rational person could clearly see. He explained that he needed a partner, not a dependent someone who could contribute equally to building the life he wanted. But what made it even worse was the tone he used, as if he was doing me some kind of favor by ending our relationship. Marcus actually told me I should be grateful that he was being honest with me instead of stringing me along when he knew it would never work out. He said I would find someone else who was more suited to my lifestyle, someone who did not have the same expectations he did. He even had the audacity to suggest we could remain friends, that there was no reason for hard feelings, since we simply wanted different things out of life. As he gathered his belongings from our shared apartment, Marcus acted like he had just completed an unpleasant but necessary task, whistling softly to himself as he packed his clothes. I stood there in my black dress, surrounded by the remains of the romantic dinner I had so carefully prepared, watching the man I thought I would marry walk out of my life like he was leaving a boring meeting. He paused at the door to tell me I could keep the apartment until the lease was up. Another gesture he seemed to think demonstrated his generosity. After Marcus left, I sat alone at that candlelit table for hours, not crying, not screaming, just processing what had happened. The apartment still smelled like beef bourguignon and vanilla candles, but now those scents felt like evidence of my foolishness, reminders of how completely I had misread our situation. That first night after Marcus walked out, I did not cry. I did not call my friends for sympathy or post anything dramatic on social media. Instead, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine, staring at the wall and feeling something I had never experienced before: a cold, calculating anger that was somehow more powerful than any emotional breakdown. By morning, I had made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. Marcus thought I had no future, because he could not see past his own narrow definition of success. He believed my creative career was a dead-end path that would never amount to anything substantial. If he wanted to see a future, I would build one so impressive it would make his corporate salary look like pocket change. I spent that entire first day creating what I called my victory plan. I researched successful creative entrepreneurs, studied their strategies, and identified the gaps in the market where I could establish myself as an authority. I realized that while Marcus saw my graphic design skills as frivolous, the business world was desperately in need of creative professionals who understood branding at a strategic level. My plan was methodical and ambitious. I would spend the next 18 months building a creative agency that specialized in branding for tech startups, a booming market where visual identity could make or break a new company. I researched every aspect of the business from client acquisition to team management, determined to approach my revenge through undeniable professional success. The first step was education. I enrolled in online courses in business development, digital marketing, and entrepreneurship. I studied during every free moment, often working until 3 a.m. to balance learning with my existing client work. I completed certifications in strategic marketing and brand development, building credentials that would establish my expertise beyond just artistic talent. Within 3 months, I had completely transformed my approach to client work. Instead of just creating pretty designs, I started offering comprehensive branding strategies that addressed market positioning, target audience psychology, and competitive analysis. I raised my rates significantly and was surprised to find that clients were willing to pay premium prices for this more strategic approach. I began networking aggressively within the startup community, attending every tech meetup and entrepreneurship event in the city. I offered to create free brand identity packages for 3 promising startups in exchange for case studies and testimonials. These projects allowed me to demonstrate my understanding of business strategy while building a portfolio that showcased real results rather than just aesthetic appeal. The breakthrough came when one of those free projects, a fintech startup called PayStreamline, was featured in TechCrunch with my branding prominently displayed. The article mentioned how their visual identity had helped them secure Series A funding, and suddenly my phone was ringing with inquiries from other early-stage companies who wanted similar results. That was when I knew I was ready to take the leap. I found 2 partners: Elena, a former marketing director, who had been laid off from a big corporation and was looking for a new challenge, and David, a web developer, who was tired of working for other people's visions. Together, we launched Innovate Branding Studio, with a focus on helping tech companies create compelling visual identities that would attract investors and customers. Our first major client was an artificial intelligence startup that needed complete brand development before their product launch. The contract was worth $50,000 more money than I had ever made on a single project. But this was just the beginning. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit startup community, And soon we were fielding calls from companies who had heard about our strategic approach to branding. Within 6 months of launching the agency, we had 12 employees and a client waiting list. Our annual revenue was approaching $800,000, and I was being invited to speak at conferences about the intersection of design and business strategy. Industry publications started featuring articles about our innovative approach to branding, and I began receiving recognition as an emerging leader in the creative entrepreneurship space. The moment I knew I had truly succeeded came when Forbes reached out to interview me for their 30 Under 30 list. The article would feature my story as an example of how creative professionals could build scalable businesses by combining artistic talent with strategic thinking. Marcus had said I had no future, but here I was, being recognized nationally as a visionary entrepreneur. Exactly 22 months after Marcus told me I had no future, I was sitting in my corner office overlooking downtown when my assistant knocked on my door with an unusual expression on her face. She told me there was someone downstairs who claimed to be an old friend, someone named Marcus, who insisted I would want to see him. I had been expecting this moment for months. My success had not been quiet or hidden. The Forbes article had generated significant media attention, and my face had been on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine just 3 weeks earlier. Local business journals had featured stories about Innovate Branding Studio's rapid growth, and I had been invited to give a keynote speech at the largest marketing conference on the East Coast. When Marcus walked into my office, I could see him taking in every detail: the modern furniture, the awards displayed on my walls, the view of the city skyline that spoke to the premium location we could afford. His eyes lingered on the framed Forbes article, and I watched his expression change as the reality of my transformation sank in. He started with flattery, telling me how incredible it was to see my success, how he always knew I was special and destined for great things. Marcus said he had been following my career developments and felt genuinely proud of what I had accomplished. He kept emphasizing how impressed he was, as if his approval still held some value in my world. Then came what I had been waiting for: the admission. Marcus told me he had made a terrible mistake in how our relationship ended. He said he had been going through his own insecurities about success and had projected those fears onto our partnership. He claimed he never truly believed I lacked potential, that he had been scared of his own limitations, and took that fear out on me in the worst possible way. Marcus wanted to know if we could really talk about the possibility of reconnecting. He said he had been thinking about me constantly since seeing the Forbes article, realizing that I was exactly the kind of ambitious, successful person he wanted in his life. He actually used the word soulmate, suggesting that perhaps we had both needed to grow individually before we could appreciate what we had together. As I listened to his carefully prepared speech, I felt something I had not expected: complete indifference. The man who had once had the power to devastate me with his words now seemed small and desperate, someone who only valued me now that my success was publicly validated. I realized that Marcus still fundamentally misunderstood what made me valuable as a person. I told him that I appreciated his apology, but his timing revealed everything I needed to know about his character. Marcus had not reached out when I was struggling to rebuild my confidence after his rejection. He had not supported me during the long nights when I questioned whether I was strong enough to build the business I envisioned. He only wanted back in now that I had proven my worth according to his narrow definition of success. But there was something else I needed to tell him, something that would make this conversation even more satisfying than I had imagined. During the intensive months of building my business, I had met James, a software engineer, who had been working with one of our startup clients. James had seen me at my most stressed and overwhelmed when I was working 18-hour days and questioning every decision I made. James had never once suggested I should choose a more practical career path. Instead, he brought me dinner when I was too busy to eat and listened to my ideas with genuine interest and respect. He celebrated every small victory with me and offered encouragement during the inevitable setbacks that come with building something from nothing. Most importantly, James had believed in my vision before it became profitable. I told Marcus that I was engaged to someone who had invested in my dreams, when they were just dreams, someone who understood that real partnership meant supporting each other's growth rather than demanding immediate returns. James had proposed 3 months earlier during a quiet weekend at his family's cabin, telling me that watching me build my business had shown him what real strength and determination looked like. Marcus left my office that day, looking deflated, finally understanding that he had not just lost a girlfriend, but had missed the opportunity to be part of something extraordinary. He had chosen security over partnership validation, over love, and now he was facing the consequences of those choices. The final lesson in all of this came not from proving Marcus wrong, but from discovering what I was truly capable of when someone believed in me completely. The best revenge was not making him regret his decision, but becoming so fulfilled in my new life that his opinion became irrelevant. Building Innovate Branding Studio taught me that success is not about proving your worth to people who could not see your value in the first place. Real success comes from finding your own path and surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your journey, not just your destination. Marcus had been right about one thing: we were not compatible. But it was not because I lacked a future. It was because he could not envision a future that was different from his own limited expectations. I used to think love meant having someone believe in your dreams. Now I know that true love means having someone help you build those dreams, even when the outcome is uncertain. 3 years after Marcus walked out of my life convinced I had nothing to offer, I have everything he said I would never achieve. But more importantly, I have something he will never understand: the satisfaction of knowing I built it all myself, and the joy of sharing it with someone who was there for the journey, not just the destination. What do you think about Marcus trying to come back after seeing my success? Have you ever had someone underestimate your potential, only to want back in when you proved them wrong? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story inspired you to chase your own dreams, regardless of what others think, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about turning setbacks into comebacks. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their future is not defined by people who cannot see their potential. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that the best revenge against those who doubt you is a life so amazing that their opinion becomes irrelevant.